Why is it so darn hard to kick sugar? Is it your fault? Or is it that you're wired for sugar? Want some mints? Let's talk about it. Hey there, it's Dr. G, internal medicine physician, lifestyle modification coach, and GLP-1 expert. One of the biggest problems that patients come in and have with their lifestyle modification journey is that they have such an attraction to sweets, sugars, pastries, milkshakes, cookies, chips, all these things that basically, satisfy this urge for these sugary snacks. And they want to know when they come in is, what is going on? Is it me, doc? What's going on with me? We needed to take a look into what the evidence says about sugar. Is this true that, is it because the patient just has bad habits? Part of it, but is there something inside of human beings that wires human beings to go after these foods more than other foods than they should? And is this the reason why obesity is such a problem in the United States? It's possible, but I wanted to see what the evidence says, and has this been studied? And are there any, papers out there? Is there any evidence to support the thinking that the reason why you or I or anyone else is going through this issue with being overweight or having healthcare issues because of overeating carbs, basically, is something that it can control or not? So let's talk about what happens when you eat carbohydrates. There are basically two types of carbohydrates. You have simple carbs and you have complex carbs. The simple carbs are basically processed foods that have the ability to increase your blood glucose very, very quickly. And as a result, the insulin produced from your pancreas has to chase that high blood glucose level that happened immediately after you had the meal. And you start to have spiking and dropping of your blood glucose brought on by your food intake and simple carbohydrate breakdown. And then the drop is brought down by your insulin level, chasing that number and pushing it down very quickly. So you have what's called a glucose or sugar roller coaster. Now, sugar roller coasters obviously are not going to be ideal. That's not what we want. And over time can produce what is better known as type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance in most human beings. If this system of high level glucose followed by dropping glucose from the insulin release keeps going on and over and over and over again. Clearly, type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance is not ideal metabolically, and of course for our lifestyle modification journey, just not something you want to be happening. Complex carbohydrates, on the other hand, are slower to increase in the blood glucose over time and easier for the insulin to, catch up to and bring down. So it's a less violent up and down in the blood glucose levels when complex carbohydrates are taken in typically versus your simple processed foods and simple sugars. This was studied in a paper. It's called Circulating Glucose Levels Modulate Neural Control of Desire for High-Calorie Foods in Humans. This is a pretty cool study designed in the United States where they took many subjects and put them inside of a functional MRI machine, which lights up different parts of the brain based off of what's stimulated at the time. They hooked up the patients to a continuous glucose monitor to see what the blood glucose was in real time. And they also placed in front of the subjects, as they were monitoring both their brain function and the glucose levels, put in front of them different types of craving foods: burgers, chips, cookies, all types of sweets, sundaes, ice cream, all types of sweets, right? And lastly, they gave the subjects the ability to rate each one of these foods as it showed up on the screen in front of them and how likely they were to want that food or eat that food right now based off of how they feel with the picture and being in that situation right then and there. In conclusion, without going too deep into this super cool study, they found out that when the blood glucose levels were reading higher or adequate, that these patients or these subjects were less likely to rate higher these craving foods. And conversely, when the blood glucose was low, they would rate these foods a lot higher to be consumed when the blood glucose was low. So interesting stuff. But the most interesting thing is that not only is it just a habit thing that they want it, but also the brain would light up. The brain lights up in an area that controls glucose cravings. And that also influenced why these subjects wanted, it said yes when the blood glucose was low. So there's a neuron, there's a brain, there's actually something inside the brain that wires the brain to go get blood glucose when blood glucose is low, which makes sense because the brain needs glucose. It wants glucose. It needs glucose preferentially to actually function. So it's not going to allow you to, bring it to zero and not push you to, hey man, go get some sugar so we can live. I don't want to die. I want to stay awake. I need to stay awake to keep you alive, to keep you away from the saber-toothed tiger over there, or the big old elephant that's chasing us, or here, to be alive right here in modern times. So it's an evolutionary response, appears to be, and we need it. We need it there. We need to be reminded to go get carbohydrates when it's necessary, but it's also very necessary to know that these roller coasters project us or trigger this light up area a lot more often. So your cravings come a lot more often based on the fact that you're having this roller coaster up and down and up and down. So let's look at another study called Evidence for Sugar Addiction, Behavioral and Neurochemical Effects of Intermittent Excessive Sugar Intake. This investigated the addictive properties of sugar that put it on the level of some drugs of abuse. What were some of the outcomes? So from a behavioral standpoint, some of the animals that were subjected to high levels of intermittent glucose had more of a bad reaction in that they would binge eat when the blood glucose wasn't forced on them anymore. So they're on their own, they get their own opportunity to eat, they would binge eat these foods all by themselves. These animals, they also showed signs of withdrawal, which is crazy. Like when these foods were taken away from them, these animals actually showed anxiety, teeth chattering, shivers. They would actually have actual signs of withdrawal, like it was a drug being taken away from them. Obviously, these are behaviors or signs that we see in human beings when certain addictive and abuse drugs are taken away, which is super, super interesting. And there were neurochemical changes in the way the chemicals in the brain, just like in the previous study, where the nucleus accumbens is called, the pleasure center of the brain, would change in response to high levels of blood glucose and high glucose foods. So over time, the pleasure or the chemical reaction that happens when we eat food, it would need a higher and higher dose. They would need more and more glucose in order to get that reaction back. So that's basically what happens in humans, we believe. We believe that as we continue to intake higher and higher glucose levels in order to have that reaction or that feeling that we get from glucose, which is, we'll talk about it in a second. There's an actual feeling that you get that's wired in the brain. You need more glucose in order to keep that feeling. So you're chasing, quote unquote, that high still. So you're literally trying to chase that high. There's a feeling you're supposed to get from actually tasting sweets, and your body has now been resistant to that, and it needs a bigger and bigger and bigger dose to make that response happen for you. Interesting stuff. Again, a lot of withdrawal. When these sugars were removed from the animals, tons of withdrawal signs, sweating, they were chattering, they were anxious, they were jittery, all of the things that you would find from people or when they are coming off of, some illicit and drugs of abuse. So in summary, the study, what it showed in animal subjects, glucose, when given in excessive amounts and intermittently, can cause signs of addiction in the animal subjects, such as withdrawal, like I said, and needing a higher and higher dose to produce the neurochemical response that is expected, and also binge eating, behavioral changes, wanting to hunt down these foods when it's removed from forcing them on subjects. Now they were actually go get them on their own. Very super interesting, right? Goodness. So clearly, these two studies show that there's a lot for us to know and for a lot for us to to hone in on the exact things that are happening, the neurochemical, behavioral aspects of sugar addiction and excessive sugar intake in the setting of treating obesity, diabetes, treating patients and consulting patients on lifestyle modification changes like I do every single day, and an overall public health issue because of the fact of the prevalence of ultra-processed foods and processed foods, which turn into glucose spikes and intermittent glucose elevations in the general population here in the US. The last concept I want to also highlight here is one that's called protein leverage. And protein leverage is a little bit different. You won't think that this is a reason why you will overeat or have cravings, but there are some thinking, there's actually studies that are done that show that due to the low intake of protein overall, that people go and eat more. Because protein is something that you cannot produce, people do not produce on their own. You have to get it from diets. It's lean meats, fish, poultry, eggs, dairy, some legumes will have the proteins that you need that are essential to keep your body working properly and, contribute to your lean muscle mass. So as it is, the brain, if not presented with enough protein, will actually have you overeat, eating and eating and eating until you fulfill that need. So it's even more important when you are on a lifestyle modification journey and you're reducing your caloric intake, shows why I feel that protein is the most important macronutrient. Got to fill up on the protein for a lot of reasons. And now, based off of protein leverage, it shows why you should eat your fill of protein to stop from overeating. And when you go to overeat, usually go to carbohydrates, simple sugars, go back into your sugar roller coaster and overdoing it on the snacks in between your meals or even during your meals. If you're eating your food on the plate wrong, you may eat the carbohydrates first and you're spiking there and don't end up eating enough of your protein on your plate. So it's just that important. That protein leverage concept is something that is being studied more and more, and we're looking into how exactly it affects, if it affects really in obesity. We do know it does actually cause an increase in overeating, but there's not really 100% agreement in the evidence in the literature if this is a reason for obesity overall in the United States. So how does this all pertain to you? These three things. I mean, hey, you have the up and down, the sugar roller coaster, the glucose roller coaster that promotes overeating. Then you have the behavioral and addictive aspects of eating glucose. When you touch glucose to your tongue, it releases dopamine in your brain. And that feel good is something that's wired in everyone's brain. And if you're doing it more and more and more, obviously you're gonna need a higher and higher dose of the drug, which in this case is sugar, to get that dopamine release and that good feeling that you're chasing when you're eating this food. And number three, the fact that we as Americans, in general, do not eat enough protein in our diet. So this presents a way for us to attack this problem that's wrecking our lifestyle modifications by changing our behavior and using our physiology against us or against the weight. Yeah, really not against us. We want to keep your physiology working for us. This is how we do it. Prioritize protein. Let's start from there. That's something that you can actually do and you have control of. Protein on the plate will make you feel fuller, more, quicker, and for longer. And then also consuming it on the plate, not leaving it there, but consuming the protein that's on your plate and the proper amount of protein on a daily basis will make it so that you eat less throughout the day. You may still end up having cravings if you don't get enough carbs. So carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates are still important. Mindful eating. When we're eating, let's be mindful about what we're putting on the plate. Putting on the plate the proper amounts of protein, veggies, legumes, and carbohydrates is absolutely imperative. That's what's going to help you to make sure that you have the right things on the plate so that way your blood glucose does not drop too far, so that way you're not craving after even just having a meal. because we just talked about it. If you don't eat enough of protein, if you don't eat enough of the protein, your body's still going to go after and want some more after the meal anyway. And this is after having a bunch of carbs. So making sure that you're mindfully fixing the plate in such a manner that it fits your macronutrient needs, especially for protein, is important. Number 2, understanding that yes, we are all wired to have a dopamine kick after eating sweets. So being mindful about why you're eating these foods and what is it you're trying to feel is super important. And don't try to go cold turkey. This is, we just talked about it. This thing is addictive and it has addictive properties and can cause addiction in you. And if you go cold turkey, your body's just gonna want it more and more and more. So what's the proper way to eat it? Eat it with, if you can, with a protein or with fiber. Add those filler foods along with the snacks that you're going to have, or you're going to want, and you want to intake, and have those after a meal. Have it after you've had a good load of protein, a good load of fiber, and now you can have whatever it is. And also making sure you have a proper amount. Let's not overdo it chasing this dopamine hit from the sugar. And number 3, making sure that you will eat a steady meal throughout the day, slowly but surely. These are for folks that have the high cravings. If you have very high cravings for pastries and cookies and chips and everything else, you are one of the type of people that need a throughout the day slow dose of your proteins, legumes, and complex carbohydrates, so that way you are not on the roller coaster all day. You are more steady and less apt to binge on a craving food like your chips and your cookies and your burgers and French fries and everything else. Some more things that I suggest you can do is, if you are finding that on a GLP-1 journey that you are craving more than usual, means probably that you are not eating enough, or you're eating some of the wrong foods in the wrong order. Remember, I say that you should eat the proteins first, legumes and veggies next, and then your complex or simple carbs, if you have some, in a small proportion on the plate, right? To make sure that you have enough of the glucose on board, you have enough of the foods that you need, the proteins that drive away the hunger, the legumes to give you the fiber, and then your carbohydrates, because you do need carbohydrates in your journey, because if you drop, you're going to actually promote the cravings. So cutting out 100% carbs on many people is just not the right thing for you. It may be good for them over there, but if you're having cravings, that's probably where it's at. Use vegetables as a starter. You can use vegetables as a starter at the beginning of a dinner meal. It'll help to fill you up with fiber at the beginning, and then you have your meal and it has some more veggies maybe and less carbs, and maybe you'll do a lot better with the dessert. Now, dessert. You can do dessert. There's no problem with doing dessert, but if you fill up with the right things before you actually have the dessert, you are less likely to overdo it on the dessert. So it's okay. No one's perfect. You can have the dessert, but just make sure it fits into your total caloric needs for the day. For calories, you just know it's not the best thing you ate today, but you do need it in order to stay away from the withdrawal symptoms that you probably have, if you are one of the folks that have a serious cravings issue going in. Do yourself a favor. For breakfast, when you have breakfast, if you're a big person on cravings, have a more savory breakfast. Stay away from the sweets in the morning, because that's just going to start you on the roller coaster from the very, very beginning. So stay on a savory breakfast with high protein intake, which then again will drive down your hunger drive all throughout the day, and keep you on the best foot forward when you start your day. Here's one that we use from time to time, and it's been around for a long time. It's not anything that I'm making up, or it's not anything brand new. Vinegar. Using a tablespoon of vinegar in a tall glass of water seems to drive down sugar cravings, seems to drive down snacking through the day. So many folks that come into the office, we've done a lot of the other things, and we use this one technique, if they're open to it, to drive down cravings and it helps and it works. It works, definitely works. Another tip is to, after dinner, get to moving around immediately. Get to moving around, do 10 to 15 minutes of, cleaning around the house, maybe go for a quick walk, something to drive down that blood glucose without having to do it all with insulin, because insulin is going to take some time. It's waiting, it's trying to drive itself up there to grab that glucose. But if you start burning it by moving these muscles around, and muscles love to grab it themselves, they're like, hey, well, I'll just use it, I'm just grab myself. Great way to keep the cravings down from keep staying off of the roller coaster. And I think I mentioned it before, but I'm gonna mention it specifically. If you're going to have sweets, make sure you wrap it up with something to drive down the overeating part of it, and also to keep it to a minimal level of driving up the blood glucose levels. Put protein around it, put some fiber around it. Just dress it up with other stuff to keep the carbs from being broken down so quickly that it drives up your blood sugar. So it is true that sugar is addictive. It can drive your behaviors. And it is also true that you can modulate how much you eat of it by eating more of the important macronutrient protein in the right amounts. Those are some of the tips and the evidence that shows that yes, glucose and sugar, snacks, cravings is an absolute thing, and addiction is a thing. You can break them slowly by doing the things that I just told you about. If you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section below. And if you'd like to get into our lifestyle change community, check the description below. There's a link there for a 7-day free trial where you have access to me, you have access to our trainers, you have access to the rest of the group where everyone is talking about stuff like this and how to win on your lifestyle modification journey. Stay healthy, stay informed, and I'll see you soon.